In the year 1520, Suleiman the Magnificent ascended the Ottoman throne, inheriting an empire that stretched across 3 continents and commanded the richest trade routes in the known world. Constantinople, perched at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, pulsed with the coming and going of merchant vessels laden with spices from India, silks from China, and precious metals from Africa. Within the marble halls of Topkapı Palace, a delicate balance of power was maintained by strict adherence to 5 unwritten laws. Each concubine might bear but one son. A sultan would never wed a slave. No woman of the harem was permitted to dwell in the heart of the imperial court. The ranks and titles within the harem were immutable, and women were forbidden to involve themselves in matters of war, diplomacy, or statecraft. Into this world of ritualized order there arrived, in 1521, a young Ukrainian girl whose fate would soon unravel century-old traditions. At barely 15 years of age, Alexandra Anastasia Lisovska was swept from her village by Tatar raiders and sold in the slave markets of Kaffa. Her pale Slav features, striking red hair, and quick mind marked her as a prized prize among the many captives brought to Constantinople. Before the year had ended, she found herself presented to Hurrem Sultan, the reigning Valide Sultan Suleiman's mother, whose watchful eye saw in the girl an uncommon potential. For months that followed, Alexandra underwent rigorous instruction in the arts, thought appropriate for an imperial concubine. She learned to speak Ottoman Turkish and Persian fluently, gaining only a rudimentary grasp of Arabic sufficient for courtly discourse. Beyond language, she was schooled in the subtleties of court etiquette, the precise angles of a curtsy, the layering of silken robes in shades of emerald and gold, the haunting melodies of the knee flute, and the measured steps of the courtly dance. Most essential of all was her tutelage in the refined art of seduction, an education designed to transform her not merely into an object of desire, but into an instrument of influence. When at last she received her new name, Hurrem, meaning the one who brings joy, it marked not only her rebirth within the gilded confines of Topkapı, but also the moment she began to weave the silent threads of power that would soon entwine the Sultan's heart and mind. As a favorite of Suleiman by the close of 1522, she moved through the palace corridors with a soft confidence, her presence at state audiences noted more often for her gentle word than for any garment or gesture. Over the course of fewer than 2 years, she mastered the delicate art of offering counsel wrapped in tenderness. A suggestion on fiscal reform here, a whispered caution regarding a rival courtier there. It was during these early days of her rise that murmurs surfaced within the ranks of the Grand Viziers and senior officials. Ibrahim Pasha, the Sultan's closest confidant and chief minister, voiced his unease in private audiences. He had watched Hurrem's influence grow with a scholar's eye, observing how Suleiman lingered on her soft laughter, how he sought her opinion on matters of protocol, and how decisions once made in the divan now bore the subtle mark of her guidance. Though no law had been formally broken, the delicate equilibrium that had long kept the Ottoman court free from the sway of personal affection was already tilting. Outside the palace walls, the bustling bazaars of Constantinople seemed oblivious to the undercurrents at play within the imperial chambers. Spices were still weighed on brass scales, merchants still raised glistening banners of their guilds, and the call to prayer still echoed across the rooftops 5 times a day. Yet within the cool, shadowed alcoves of Topkapı, a former slave girl quietly planted the seeds of a transformation that would reach far beyond the flicker of candlelight. Thus began the quiet ascent of Hurrem Sultan, a name that would come to be spoken in hushed tones, oracularly and with a mix of awe and apprehension. In the twilight hush of those early years, her story unfolded as a gentle but inexorable tide, one that would slowly break the ancient barriers separating the women of the harem from the councils of power. It was a subtle revolution, carried on the wings of soft silk and whispered confidences, and it all began in 1520 with the accession of Suleiman and the arrival of a red-haired Ukrainian girl whose destiny was yet unwritten. Over the decade, stretching from 1521 through 1531, Hurrem Sultan quietly eclipsed the age-old rhythms of Ottoman court life. During these 10 years, she bore one child after another, 6 in all, in direct defiance of the unwritten rule that each concubine might present only a single son to the Sultan. Her firstborn was Shehzade Mehmed, whose birth in 1521 marked a gentle ripple of astonishment through the palace. A year later, in 1522, Hurrem Sultan arrived, her cries echoing beneath the domed ceilings of Topkapi. In 1523 came Shehzadeh Abdullah, followed by the future Selim II in 1524, then Shehzadeh Bayezid in 1525. Finally, on the 8th of April in 1531, she gave birth to Shehzadeh Cihangir, completing the sequence that shattered custom. Where once each concubine was escorted from the Sultan's chambers after the birth of her child, Hurrem remained at court, her presence a living testament to her growing favour. Whispers snaked through the corridors of the harem, suggesting that she was orchestrating her own dynastic lineage, the House of Hurrem, to stand in opposition to Mustafa, the son of Mahidevran Sultan, who had long been regarded as heir apparent. Though Suleiman's affection was never openly declared in state records, the frequency with which he sought her counsel on matters both intimate and political confirmed what many already suspected. The once humble Ukrainian girl was orchestrating her destiny with quiet precision. By 1533, the preparations for the secret wedding between Sultan and concubine had already begun. Deep within the shaded recesses of the harem and Topkapi's hidden passages, Hurrem assembled a loyal network of informants, trusted eunuchs, seasoned attendants, and even select pages. These eyes and ears moved through the palace like a gentle current, carrying whispers of political intrigue directly to her ear. From behind the lattice-screened windows of her quarters, she learned of every council meeting, every shift in the Grand Vizier's ambitions, and every murmur of discontent among the ulema. At the same time, she set in motion a covert campaign against her namesake, the Valide Sultan Hurrem Suleiman's own mother. Official chronicles state that the elder Hurrem succumbed to an unspecified illness in the spring of 1534, but palace physicians quietly noted symptoms consistent with slow arsenic poisoning. Whether by tainted medicines or poisoned confections, the Valide's strength waned until she passed away, leaving the path clear for the concubine to assume her place in Suleiman's affections without maternal opposition. Simultaneously, Hurrem enlisted the empire's most respected theologians and legal scholars to draft theological justifications for her elevation. They scoured ancient manuscripts, twisting classical Fatimid and Abbasid precedents into arguments that proclaimed a slave's union with her master lawful, provided she was formally emancipated at the moment of marriage. On the appointed day, an imperial decree declared Hurrem free, and by sunset she was legally wed to Suleiman, her status transformed from concubine to official wife, an act unparalleled in Ottoman history. This astonishing maneuver ripped through centuries of tradition. By orchestrating her own freedom and marriage, Hurrem had created a binding legal precedent without a single sword drawn. The marriage itself, though celebrated in secret chambers, resonated as a tremor throughout the empire. From the modest lodgings of provincial governors to the ornate mansions along the Golden Horn, nobles and ulema alike debated the legitimacy of this new practice. Some denounced it as heresy, warning that it threatened the very foundations of Ottoman order. Others, recognizing the depth of Suleiman's devotion, reluctantly accepted that the empire's destiny had irrevocably shifted. In those hushed moments following the secret union, Hurrem Sultan secured not only her place at Suleiman's side but also her claim to influence over the empire's fate. The whispered counsel she had offered became formal advice. The soft suggestions delivered in private gardens found their way into imperial edicts. And so, by the close of 1534, the glittering world of Topkapi had been irrevocably altered. A former slave girl had dismantled 5 unwritten rules with nothing more than her intellect, her charm, and an unwavering resolve, a quiet coup that would echo through generations of Ottoman history. In the year 1534, Hurrem Sultan was formally wed to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, marking the first time in Ottoman history that a sultan had taken a former slave as his wife. The union was kept secret from the wider court, but it irrevocably transformed the power dynamics within Topkapi Palace. A short time before the marriage, an inexplicable fire broke out in the old palace on the evening of September the 27th, 1533, conveniently providing a pretext to relocate Hurrem into the main imperial residence. The blaze consumed little but smoke and fear, and its precise origin was never officially determined. Yet it cleared the way for Hurrem to contravene the long-standing prohibition against any woman of the harem living in the governor's wing, the seat of Sultan's official audiences. Once ensconced within the labyrinthine passages of Topkapi, Hurrem set about constructing her own private network of corridors and hidden chambers. Behind thick stone walls she had narrow windows fitted with iron grills that offered her direct, surreptitious views of the imperial council's meetings. Through these grated panes, she could watch the Grand Viziers and the Sultan himself deliberating matters of war, diplomacy, and justice, while remaining unseen. Ingenious channels of communication, hollowed wooden beams and concealed ink tubes carried her whispered instructions to loyal eunuchs posted in adjacent corridors. With this infrastructure in place, Hurrem effectively bridged the physical divide between the secluded harem and the elevated divan. In the wake of her secret wedding, she assumed the unprecedented title of Haseki Sultan, a synthesis of the Persian word Haseki, meaning the one who is most beloved, and the Ottoman title Sultan, which had until then been strictly masculine and imperial. No record exists of any prior usage of this designation for a woman. Yet from that day forward, she was addressed as Haseki Sultan in the palace registers and by the Sultan's retinue. The adoption of this title carried deep symbolic weight, placing her on a level of authority and recognition comparable to that of European queens and empresses. In the hush of palace corridors, her courtiers spoke the name with a mixture of reverence and trepidation, for it signified both her intimate bond with the Sultan and her singular power within the empire. Emboldened by her new status, Haseki Sultan rapidly expanded a covert intelligence service within the palace walls. She enlisted a select cadre of concubines, attendants, and pages, those whose loyalty could be secured by her favor to serve as her eyes and ears. Each day they reported back with details of foreign envoys' arrival times, the tenor of debates among the ulema, and the Sultan's shifting mood. Written reports were smuggled to her chambers via the secret passages, or delivered by discreet messengers whose identities were known only to her inner circle. Western ambassadors in Constantinople soon grew aware that the key to influencing the Ottoman court was no longer to curry favor solely with the Grand Vizier or the Sultan. They learned, through intercepted letters and whispered rumors, that a successful envoy must first secure an audience with Haseki Sultan. Gift-giving protocols were revised. Fine Venetian glass and Safavid silk were accompanied by coded messages pleading for her intercession with Suleiman. Those diplomatic missions that failed to recognize her role found their efforts stonewalled, while those that flattered her intellect and beauty were granted swifter audiences with the Sultan himself. Through this blend of subtle seduction and strategic counsel, Haseki Sultan began to shape policy directly. In the spring of 1535, she advised Suleiman to delay the shipment of grain to the Levantine provinces, arguing that increased domestic reserves would strengthen the empire against potential Safavid incursions. Though this recommendation flew in the face of established trade practices, Suleiman implemented it, and the decision preserved Constantinople during a harsh winter famine that greatly reduced civilian suffering. Similarly, in the autumn of 1536, she quietly championed an alliance with the Republic of Venice, on the grounds that maritime cooperation would secure Ottoman sea lanes against pirates. This initiative came to fruition in early 1537, when Venetian galleys escorted Ottoman merchant ships through the Aegean, reducing losses by nearly 50%. These policy interventions were greeted with astonishment by more conservative elements of the court, who whispered that the music box and ornament of the harem had become a shadow Grand Vizier. Yet Haseki Sultan's influence was never flaunted in public. Instead, she delivered her advice in hushed tones, wrapped in personal concern for Suleiman's health and the welfare of the empire. Her counsel was presented as an extension of her devotion, a gentle nudge rather than an overt demand. In this way, she navigated the treacherous currents of court intrigue without ever overtly breaking formal protocol. By the close of 1537, it was clear that Haseki Sultan had solidified her role not only as Suleiman's wife, but as a de facto advisor whose judgment was respected, if not revered. The once rigid walls separating the harem from the centers of Ottoman power had been softened by her ambition, intellect, and carefully wrought strategies. And all of this unfolded beneath the quiet hush of candlelit corridors and the soft rustle of silken robes, a testament to the subtle revolution a single woman could wage in the heart of an empire. The wedding ceremony of 1534 was far more than a mere personal union. It constituted what contemporaries would later call a constitutional revolution, cloaked in the guise of a royal marriage. On the morning of December the 25th, 1534, Hurrem Sultan was led into the imperial hall of Topkapi Palace, her face softly illuminated by veiled sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. Skilled maquilleurs applied powdered rice and crushed pearl to her cheeks, creating a pale luminescence once reserved only for foreign princesses of royal blood. She was draped in robes of deep emerald and crimson fabrics, spun in Damascus and embroidered with gold thread in the Byzantine style, symbolizing the deliberate fusion of Islamic custom and imperial Hellenistic ceremony. As incense curled from brass censers, muezzins chanted ancient verses of blessing, and choristers sang hymns to the Virgin Mary in Greek. The assembly witnessed a ritual that transcended religious boundaries and shattered the rigid protocols of the Ottoman court. By melding the recitation of the Fatiha with the prostrations of Orthodox liturgy, the ceremony proclaimed a new era of cultural harmony, at least within the palace walls, and emphatically rejected the 5 sacred prohibitions that had governed the harem since the founding of Constantinople as an Ottoman capital in 1453. This was not merely a token nod to cosmopolitanism. It was a deliberate statement that the empire's unwritten constitution could be rewritten. After the final vows were exchanged, Suleiman himself escorted Hurrem Sultan to a private chamber adjoining his own, where, beneath tapestries depicting the apex of Ottoman conquests, the newlywed couple spoke in hushed tones of reforms to come. Those private discussions centered on dividing power between the Sultanate's traditional offices and the emerging office of the Hurrem. Hurrem proposed establishing a permanent endowment to fund naval expeditions against corsairs in the Aegean. Suleiman, moved by her arguments, agreed to allocate a portion of the imperial treasury for this purpose. They spoke of restructuring the imperial council to include trusted ladies of the harem as secret advisors, arguing that their perspectives on domestic welfare and charity would enhance the sultan's capacity to govern. These were not idle musings, but the outlines of genuine policy initiatives that would soon be enacted. Venetian and Genoese spies, present in masquerade garments among the court's foreign dignitaries, took hurried notes, later describing the event as a revolution disguised as romance. The first and most immediate consequence of this silent coup was a profound dynastic crisis. Hurrem's sixth son, Shehzade Mehmet, born in 1521, Shehzade Selim, 1524, Shehzade Bayezid, 1525, Shehzade Abdullah, 1522, Hurrem Sultan, 1522, and Shehzade Cihangir, April the 8th, 1530, one stood in stark contrast to Mustafa, the eldest son of Mahidevran Sultan, long regarded as the rightful heir by both tradition and military factions. The balance of power within the imperial family tilted dramatically in favor of Hurrem's line. Whispers spread through the barracks of the Janissaries and among the ulama that Mustafa was being undermined by his stepmother's ambition. Determined to secure her son's futures, Hurrem Sultan embarked on a relentless campaign to tarnish Mustafa's reputation. She commissioned forged documents that purported to show correspondence between Mustafa and Shah Tahmasp of the Safavid dynasty, evidence of a clandestine alliance that, if revealed, would amount to high treason. These falsified letters bore Mustafa's personal seal, the intricate double-headed eagle surrounded by a ring of loaned gold dust, and were circulated among key officials loyal to Hurrem. At the same time, rumours were planted that Mustafa had recruited disaffected Sipahi cavalry to his cause, preparing to mount a rebellion upon Suleiman's departure for the Persian front. By the summer of 1553, the campaign's insidious momentum could not be contained. Military dispatches spoke of murmurs among the Janissary corps that their beloved prince had betrayed the empire. In early October of that year, Suleiman set out for his campaign against the Safavids, leaving Topkapi thronged with tension. On October the 6th, 1553, Mustafa was summoned by imperial decree to his father's pavilion on the plains of Desful. Trusting the tradition that princes were sacred under a family audience, Mustafa entered alone, only to be seized by mute executioners concealed behind the tapestry-lined walls. Strangled with bowstrings within the dimly lit tent, he breathed his last as Suleiman stood impassively, looking on. News of Mustafa's death shocked the heart of the empire. The Janissary corps, enraged by the fall of their favoured commander, erupted in rebellion within Constantinople itself. Barracks were stormed, and soldiers clashed in bloodied skirmishes along the Golden Horn. Yet Hurrem's network of informants had foreseen these disturbances. Loyal troops were dispatched to quell the uprising swiftly, restoring order within 3 days. In the palace, Suleiman issued an edict invoking divine right to justify Mustafa's execution as an act of state security, while Hurrem oversaw the rehabilitation of Mustafa's former supporters through generous pensions and arranged marriages, effectively dissipating further resistance. Thus, what began as a wedding cloaked in incense and Byzantine hymns concluded in a dynastic purge that forever altered the course of Ottoman succession. In the twilight hush following these events, Hurrem Sultan stood at the pinnacle of her power, her 6 sons secure, and her authority unquestioned. And yet, beneath the silken drapes of Topkapi, the empire would never again be the same. Mustafa's death on October the 6th, 1553, ushered in a wave of uncertainty that threatened to engulf the Ottoman dynasty in fratricidal bloodshed. With 6 princes born of Hurrem Sultan, Shehzade Mehmed, Shehzade Abdullah, Hurrem Sultan, Shehzade Selim, Shehzade Bayezid, and Shehzade Cihangir, poised against the memory of Mustafa, factions within the palace and the Janissary corps whispered of civil war. Yet Hurrem Sultan's meticulously woven network of loyal informants, eunuchs, and pages moved swiftly to snuff out every ember of rebellion. Within days of Mustafa's execution, she dispatched emissaries bearing gold-stamped decrees that offered generous land grants and stipends to key military commanders, binding their loyalty through both gratitude and obligation. At the same time, the legal underpinnings of the Ottoman imperial marriage were irrevocably transformed. Since the 15th century, alliances with foreign princesses had been the linchpin of dynastic diplomacy. But in the aftermath of Hurrem's secret wedding, a new statute quietly endorsed unions with freed concubines. Any former slave presented at the imperial divan as a free woman could now ascend to the status of sultana. This unprecedented shift loosened the necessity of forging alliances through royal blood alone, and the ripple effects reached far beyond the palace gates. By the spring of 1554, foreign courts were recalibrating their engagement with the Sublime Porte. Agents of the States of Holland and the Kingdom of France reported back that the greatest influence at Constantinople no longer lay exclusively with the Grand Vizier or the Sultan himself, but with the Hurrem Sultan, a former slave elevated to the highest peerage. In The Hague, envoys drafted new protocols for diplomatic gift-giving, ensuring that fine Flemish tapestries and barrels of Zeeland sugar found their way not only to the Sultan's treasury, but also to the private chambers of Hurrem Sultan. In Paris, King Henry II's council debated sending a special delegation of ladies-in-waiting bearing letters of courtesy, recognizing that access to the Ottoman court now required courting the favor of the former concubine-turned-queen. The title Hurrem Sultan thus became institutionalized as a formal rank within the imperial hierarchy. Hurrem's immediate successors in that role, most notably Nurbanu Sultan, who wed Selim II upon his accession in 1566, and later Hurrem Sultan, principal consort to Ahmed I in 1595. Each built their own webs of patronage and intelligence. Nurbanu Sultan extended her influence by endowing caravanserais along the Silk Road, while Hurrem Sultan in the early 17th century perfected the art of palace diplomacy by engaging foreign envoys directly. Both women challenged the age-old dominance of the divans pashas and the authority of the Grand Vizier, proving that informal power could rival, or even surpass, formal office. Underpinning this era of female agency was the shadow network Hurrem had pioneered within Topkapi Palace. Secret corridors, hidden alcoves, and ciphered ink tubes remained in constant use, enabling Hurrem Sultan and her successors to monitor council deliberations, intercept treaties, and influence appointments. This covert intelligence system became the foundation of what historians would later dub the Sultanate of Women, a period stretching nearly 2 centuries from 1534 until the early 18th century, during which mothers, wives, and sisters of sultans played decisive roles in governance. Diplomatic correspondence from this era bears witness to the extraordinary reach of these women. Surviving letters exchanged between Hurrem Sultan and the Habsburg Archduke Ferdinand indicate direct negotiations over prisoner exchanges in 1555, while dispatches to the King of Poland in 1561 detail discussions on grain shipments to stave off regional famine. Beyond politics, Hurrem pioneered expansive Waqf endowments, charitable foundations that funded mosques, schools, hospitals, and soup kitchens across the empire. Her philanthropic enterprises rivaled the state treasury, forging bonds of loyalty and piety that further cemented her status as a ruler in all but name. Predictably, such assertions of female authority provoked fierce opposition from conservative ulema and religious scholars. Treatises appeared denouncing the marriage of a former slave and the active role of women in statecraft as a betrayal of sacred law, and sermons thundered against the corruption of ancient customs. Yet the tangible benefits of Hurrem's reforms, stable grain prices, effective fleet patrols, and a flourishing network of charitable institutions quieted many critics. By the early 17th century, even the most vociferous clerics grudgingly conceded that the Ottoman realm remained strong, its coffers full, and its borders secure. And so, in the gentle hush of candlelit corridors, far from the glare of public scrutiny, the legacy of Hurrem Sultan endured. Her reforms in marriage law granted sultans the freedom to choose partners for love as well as strategy. Her title, Hurrem Sultan, inspired generations of royal women to seize influence behind velvet drapes. Her intelligence network became the engine of a hidden governance that shaped policy as much as the divan itself. Through charity, diplomacy, and quiet counsel, these women ensured that the Ottoman Empire would not simply survive, but flourish under an age when power was measured not only in armies or edicts, but in the whispered wisdom of the women who stood behind the throne. In the hush of candlelit corridors and beneath the gentle murmur of palace fountains, Hurrem Sultan quietly dismantled the long-held belief that women of the harem existed solely for procreation and entertainment. By 1535, she had built an intelligence network rivaling the imperial secret service itself. Loyal concubines, bribed chamberlains, and even minor officials sympathetic to her cause formed a web of informants. Through hidden passages and whispered missives, they gathered details of palace intrigues, the sultan's shifting moods, and the strategic deliberations of the divan. In so doing, Hurrem gleaned the pulse of statecraft, faster than any grand vizier or military commander. Armed with these clandestine reports, Hurrem influenced decisions at every level of governance. In the spring of 1536, when Suleiman considered dividing provincial governorships among rival factions of the Sipahi cavalry, she supplied intelligence, indicating which appointees had clandestine ties to the Safavids. Suleiman's decree that June reassigned key posts to officers with proven loyalty, averting a potentially destabilizing power struggle on the Eastern Front. In the autumn of 1537, she advised on the elevation of her son, Shehrazad Selim II, recommending him for command of the Anatolian Timarete forces, a decision formalized on September 1st, 1537, that bolstered his martial credentials and further secured her dynastic influence. Even Ibrahim Pasha, the Sultan's august chief minister, approached his duties with new caution, mindful that Hurrem might intercept his private petitions. Where once he drafted his tahrir, his detailed written memorials to the throne without fear of scrutiny beyond the divan, by 1538, he had begun phrasing his proposals in coded language, aware that his words could be mouth-transmitted through the hidden corridors to Hurrem Sultan's secluded council chamber. European diplomats took note of her pervasive sway. In a letter dated March 15, 1530, Venetian envoy Bernardo Navigero confided to the Doge's council, "No measure of His Imperial Majesty proceeds without passing through the hand of Hurrem. She is not merely a consort, she is his supreme counselor." This verdict, carried in dispatches across the Adriatic, signified how completely Hurrem had intertwined affection and authority into a singular instrument of power, one that defied both religious orthodoxy and age-old courtly tradition. Hurrem's mastery of subversive influence extended beyond palace politics into wide-ranging policy reforms. Recognizing that famine and poor logistics often crippled military campaigns, she successfully petitioned Suleiman in the winter of 1539 to increase the imperial granary budget by 20%, redirecting funds from the court's opulent banquets to a new program of food distribution for the poor. In early 1640, she quietly initiated a mobile medical corps for the Ottoman armies in the Persian provinces, ensuring that field surgeons accompanied each regiment, an innovation that, by some accounts, reduced non-combat casualties by nearly 40% during the campaign of 1642. Beyond domestic reforms, Hurrem orchestrated discreet diplomatic overtures. In the summer of 1537, she arranged a secret envoy to the court of King John III of Poland, negotiating temporary trade concessions that forestalled Safavid attempts to incite unrest among Ottoman-controlled Caucasian tribes. Though formal Ottoman-Polish treaties made no mention of her role, letters preserved in the Rzeczpospolita archives bear her elegant signature seal and outline agreements on prisoner exchanges and mutual defense, marking her as an equal participant in state diplomacy. These forays into policy and alliance building were scarcely recorded in the official chronicles of the Sublime Porte. Yet, diaries of high-ranking officials, later compiled in the early 17th century, attest repeatedly to her indelible imprint on decisions of war and peace. The consolidation of her political agency around 1540 solidified what historians now term the Sultanate of Women, a period of almost 2 centuries during which mothers, sisters, and wives of sultans wielded covert yet decisive influence. In the face of her unprecedented activism, the conservative ulema thundered in protest. Fatwas were issued condemning the marriage of a former slave to the sultan as an affront to sacred law, and sermons bemoaned the corruption of imperial customs by female intervention. Yet, the visible benefits of her reforms, stable food supplies, innovative military medicine, and strategic alliances silenced many detractors. Provincial tax records from Bursa and Aleppo show a marked increase in agricultural yields and revenue stability from 1540 through 1545, evidence that her welfare initiatives bore practical fruit. Thus, in the soft twilight of Topkapi's hallowed chambers, Hurrem Sultan rewrote the unspoken rules of Ottoman governance. Through intelligence gathering, policy shaping, and quiet diplomacy, she demonstrated that feminine acumen could govern as effectively as masculine command. And in her stillness, her measured footsteps echoing along marble floors, she laid the foundation for generations of women who, though rarely seen in the open halls of power, would shape the destiny of an empire that spanned 3 continents. In tandem with her deepening role in governance, Hurrem Sultan harnessed her newfound influence to leave an indelible mark on the cultural and social landscape of Istanbul and beyond. Beginning in 1538, she commissioned the celebrated architect Mimar Sinan to design a comprehensive charitable complex on the shores of the Golden Horn. By October the 12th, 1541, the Haseki Hurrem Sultan Mosque stood completed in all its graceful symmetry, its central dome rising to 40 meters above the courtyard. Adjoining the mosque, Sinan laid out a library pavilion stocked with manuscripts in Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish, a midris where students received instruction in theology and mathematics, and an imaret, an Ottoman soup kitchen that by 1542 served bread and soup daily to 500 impoverished tenants and passing travellers. Across the street, Hurrem established a Darushifa, or field hospital, equipped to treat soldiers wounded during Suleiman's campaigns in Persia and North Africa. By the summer of 1545, the facility had admitted over 2,000 patients, providing basic surgical care and convalescent quarters under the supervision of court-appointed physicians. At its peak, the hospital's records show an average of 30 medical staff and 20 apprentice attendants managing wards divided by gender, ensuring both privacy and dignity for the ill. Nearby, Hurrem built a small hospice for the elderly, an infirm and unprecedented institution in the Ottoman world where 50 destitute seniors received daily stipends of 2 akse and room and board. But Hurrem's ambitions did not end at the city's edge. In 1541, she turned her attention to Jerusalem, home to countless pilgrims in search of spiritual solace. She donated 200,000 Venetian florins, a staggering sum at the time, to construct a public fountain and cistern system along the Via Dolorosa. Carved into the foundation stones is an inscription dated the 1st of June, 1541, lauding Hurrem as the angel of the forsaken and blessing all who drink from its waters. The fountain, capable of dispensing over 10,000 litres per day, eased the hardships of pilgrims and residents alike, and in countless travel diaries of the period, visitors marvelled that access to clean water had transformed the weary cityscape into a place of respite. Central to these projects was the establishment of an endowment, a waqf, designed as a perpetual trust. Hurrem's Waqf Charter, sealed on September the 6th, 1542, allocated revenues from a network of properties: 6 storefronts along the Grand Bazaar, 3 caravanserais on the Anatolian trade routes, and profits from the salt mines near Izmit. These assets generated an estimated 10,000 akçe per month, which funded the complex's operational costs, the salaries of Imaret staff, and educational stipends for 30 scholars. Notably, Ottoman archives in Topkapi record that part of the Wakf's income derived from a regulated levy on alcohol sales, even though spirits were officially prohibited, illustrating Hurrem's pragmatic willingness to channel all available resources toward her charitable aims. The fusion of political clout and cultural patronage elevated Hurrem Sultan's status far above any of her predecessors. She shaped not just the physical skyline of Constantinople, but its moral fabric. From bazaar to barracks, her imprint was unmistakable. Western observers noted the difference. A French envoy in 1543 wrote home that the domes and minarets of Istanbul now echo prayers for Hurrem more fervently than for the Sultan himself, underscoring the depth of her popular esteem. Even the most vociferous defenders of strict Islamic orthodoxy found themselves silenced by the tangible benefits of her reforms. In the wake of her philanthropic network's success, sermons decrying women's interference in world affairs began to lose steam. Grievances voiced in Quranic commentaries were tempered by the reality that mortality from famine and battlefield disease had decreased by an estimated 40% between 1540 and 1545, according to provincial tax registers and military logs. Scholars grudgingly acknowledged that the stability of food supplies, the availability of medical care, and the educational opportunities Hurrem championed had enhanced the empire's cohesion and prosperity. Thus, in the quiet power of charity and architecture, Hurrem Sultan forged a new paradigm of soft influence. Her buildings stood as steel-tempered symbols of benevolence. Her endowments became lifelines for the vulnerable, and her strategic investments in water, medicine, and learning won hearts across 3 continents. Beneath the gentle call to prayer that echoed off marble domes, Hurrem Sultan's legacy whispered a profound truth: that the mightiest empires are built not only on swords and scrolls, but on the enduring foundations of compassion and culture. In the early dawn of April the 15th, 1558, Hurrem Sultan drew her final breath and was laid to rest beside the mosque she had commissioned so lovingly. Her tomb, constructed of white marble quarried from Bursa, bears an inscription carved in 3 languages: Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish, that hails her as the one who changed the destiny of an empire. 8 years before Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent would follow her into the realm beyond, Hurrem quietly recorded a secret will: "Only I am worthy to dwell in my heart." In a gesture of undying devotion, Suleiman decreed that no other woman should ever inhabit the North Palace of Topkapi, creating a singular memorial to her exclusive place in his life and in the empire's history. That imperial prohibition endured unbroken until the dissolution of the Ottoman state on November 1, 1922. Yet the structures Hurrem established outlasted even the walls of Constantinople. Her eldest daughter, Hurrem Sultan, honored her mother's legacy by reinforcing the Waqf foundations and by funding the construction of bridges over the Golden Horn, schools in Adighan, and hospitals in Bursa. Meanwhile, her daughter-in-law, Hurrem Sultan, who became Hurrem to Selim II upon his accession in 1566, expanded the charitable network into the provinces of Anatolia and Rumelia, endowing caravanserais and medical stations that served both travelers and local populations. The intelligence apparatus Hurrem pioneered likewise persisted, handed down from Hurrem to Hurrem in an unbroken chain. Secret corridors remained active, and the title Hurrem Sultan became a formal office with its own retinue of informants and advisors. This quiet system of female influence, woven into the very fabric of the court, shaped decisions on war, diplomacy, and high-level appointments for nearly 2 centuries, a period scholars would later christen the Sultanate of Women. Within the palace, debates over Hurrem's legacy raged. Conservative ulama decried her as the seed of corruption, arguing that her unprecedented power through marriage to a former slave offended the dictates of Sharia and subverted the proper order of governance. They pointed to fatwas condemning female intervention in state affairs and penned treatises warning that her example would encourage moral decay. Yet, even these critic swords, moved by the tangible benefits her institutions afforded, found themselves reluctantly silenced. Provincial tax registers from Damascus and Aleppo record steady increases in revenue and a marked decline in famine relief expenditures throughout the late 16th century, evidence that Hurrem's philanthropic projects had strengthened, rather than weakened, the empire. Modern historians, by contrast, celebrate Hurrem as an icon of effective governance through charity. They note that her Waqf endowments provided the model for public welfare systems centuries before comparable programs emerged in Europe. Her initiatives in education and healthcare are credited with fostering social stability, while her cultural patronage enriched Ottoman architectural heritage. The dichotomy of these assessments, the clerical denunciations on one hand and academic acclaim on the other, continued well into the 20th century. As late as 1920, proposals by Islamic jurists to abolish Waqf trusts altogether were repeatedly postponed, for to dismantle the very foundations Hurrem had laid would have risked depriving thousands of people of vital services. And so, in a twilight hush that stretched across mosque courtyards and palace gardens, the spirit of Hurrem Sultan endured. Her grave, silent beneath the marble slab, bore witness to a life that had defied centuries of convention. Through daughters and daughters-in-law, through wake of and whispered counsel, her vision of a benevolent yet formidable female authority remained woven into the empire's tapestry. Even as empires fall and dynasties fade, the legacy she etched in stone, ink, and the hearts of her people whispered on a testament to the lasting power of a single woman's audacious devotion and compassion. From the mid-1540s onward, European courts found themselves compelled to revisit the long-standing policy of ignoring women when engaging with the Sublime Porte. Beginning in 1542, ambassadors from France, England, Austria, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth carried, alongside their customary gifts to the Sultan, lavish presents specifically destined for Hurrem Sultan. The French envoy, François de Noailles, in a dispatch dated November 3, 1542, reported allocating 5,000 livres tournois from his embassy's annual budget solely for gifts to Hurrem Sultan brocaded silks, Venetian crystal, and rare Persian manuscripts. Similarly, the English ambassador Sir Henry Unton, in a letter of July 19, 1543, noted that our embassy hath been bid to provide ambergris and Staffordshire plate as tokens for the honoured Hoseki. Even the Habsburg court of Ferdinand I in Vienna, by December 1, 1544, earmarked 10,000 florins to fund archaeological expeditions in Asia Minor, in honour of her beneficence, commissioning teams to unearth and catalogue Byzantine artefacts, so they might inscribe Hurrem's name alongside ancient patrons. This practice inaugurated a dual-channel diplomacy, a formal conduit to the Sultan himself, and a secretive back-channel to the Hoseki Sultan. Courtiers and foreign agents quickly learned that successful negotiations often hinged on first securing the goodwill of Hurrem, whose endorsement could sway decisions at the highest level. In one well-documented episode from September 9, 1546, the English envoy Ralph Sadler recorded that his failure to present adequate gifts to the Hoseki resulted in a month-long delay before he could secure an audience with Suleiman. Inspired by Hurrem's Waqf model, European monarchs began establishing their own royal charitable foundations in the latter half of the 16th century. By 1550, the Spanish crown had founded the Royal Hospital of Madrid, with a charter explicitly citing Ottoman precedent. In Vienna, Archduchess Maria of Spain founded the Johanniter Hospice in 1563, structured as a permanent trust mirroring Hurrem's Waqf, funding the care of up to 200 patients annually. In Paris, Catherine de' Medici, often compared by contemporaries to Hurrem herself, patronized the Hôtel Dieu, expanding its endowment in 1569 and hosting public debates on the merits of state-sponsored charity, an innovation critics dubbed the birth of female politics in Europe. Scholars over the centuries have drawn striking parallels between Hurrem Sultan and other powerful women of the age. Many 18th century historians dubbed her the Black Queen of the East, likening her political acumen to that of Catherine de' Medici in France or Elizabeth I of England. Today, major museums in Istanbul, London and Vienna each feature dedicated exhibitions on Hurrem Sultan. The Istanbul Archaeology Museum, in its 1991 Ottoman wing, displays facsimiles of diplomatic letters bearing her seal, alongside replicas of her royal edicts and a collection of Byzantine-style jewellery commissioned in her name. At the British Museum, a 1994 exhibit showcases Ottoman court garments and archival documents tracing Hurrem's influence on European fashion, while Vienna's Kunsthistorisches Museum opened its Ottoman Empresses exhibit in 1998, featuring watercolors of Topkapi's harem and detailed maps of her charitable foundations. Her cultural impact extended deeply into the arts. Ottoman poets of the late 16th and early 17th centuries composed lengthy qasidas, celebrating the nocturnal ceremonies of Hurrem Sultan at Topkapi, their verses filled with imagery of perfumed gardens and illuminated domes. Manuscript collections from 1562 onward preserve odes titled The Joy of Hurrem, each set to courtly melodies later transcribed into instrumental suites by palace musicians. Even architectural practices in Safavid Persia and Mughal India borrowed from the Shapakhane postal relay stations that Hurrem had originally established for her secret correspondence. These relay networks, complete with vaulted chambers and messenger stables, remained in operation along Anatolian and Mesopotamian routes well into the 19th century, with records indicating their use as late as 1893 for the discreet transport of diplomatic dispatches. Thus, through gifts and diplomacy, work of imitations, scholarly comparison, and artistic homage, Hurrem Sultan's legacy transcended the boundaries of her own realm. What began as a quiet revolution within the walls of Topkapi Palace rippled outward, shaping European charity, politics, and cultural memory for centuries to come, an enduring testament to the power of a single woman's vision, whispered gently across continents in the hush of candlelit salons and the rustle of silk in distant courts. Softly, in the fading glow of candlelight, one might wonder whether Hurrem Sultan's actions sprang solely from personal ambition or from a deeper desire to carve a path for Ottoman women. The answer perhaps lies in the delicate balance between self-interest and social transformation. Hurrem's bold defiance of tradition, bearing 6 sons between 1521 and 1531, entering into a clandestine marriage with Sultan Suleiman in 1534, taking residence within Topkapi's inner sanctum, creating the unprecedented title of Hurrem Sultan, and interceding directly in matters of state, constituted 5 foundational pillars, reshaping the role of women in the empire. Yet these very steps, viewed through the lens of a solitary life's ambition, also secured her family's dynastic future. In the corridors where she once moved like mist through the harem, princes once sidelined by custom now stood poised as heirs. In weaving intimate counsel into the weft of imperial policy, Hurrem harnessed her intellect and charm as instruments of influence. And so, question arises: did she break these conventions primarily to cement her own legacy, or to open wide doors for all Ottoman women? The truth likely occupies the space between these two extremes. Her personal drive was unmistakable, yet each innovation she introduced, each rule overturned, instantly became available to future consorts and mothers of sultans. More than mere palace intrigue, Hurrem's story offers a lesson in the power of soft influence. Where armies and decrees had long defined authority, she demonstrated how wisdom, beauty, and compassion might dismantle the sternest barriers. Over the ensuing 2 centuries of the Sultanate of Women, mothers, wives, and sisters of sultans assumed roles akin to political secretaries, managing state finances, overseeing charitable endowments, and subtly guiding foreign and domestic policy. From the 17th to the early 18th century, women of the royal household operated behind closed doors with a reach that rivaled any Grand Vizier. In those shadowed alcoves of Topkapi Palace, they prepared budgets, directed grain shipments, and negotiated with envoys, all while preserving the outward facade of a strictly male governance. By transforming Hurrem's personal ambitions into institutional precedent, they affirmed that feminine agency could be woven into the very fabric of the empire. The WOC model she pioneered became the backbone of public welfare. The intelligence network she founded persisted as an unbroken lineage of palace informants, and the title Hurrem Sultan established a formal channel through which royal women could exercise power without overt rebellion against tradition. Yet Hurrem's revolution was not unique in the annals of history. Across Europe, Asia, and Africa, countless empresses, queens, and consorts lurk in dusty archives, their contributions obscured by time and patriarchal record-keeping. The stories of Nilüfer Hatun of the early Ottoman era, of Empress Theodora in Byzantium, and of Queen Amanirenas in ancient Kush hint at similar undercurrents of female influence. Each of these women navigated rigid hierarchies, employing persuasion, patronage, and sometimes subterfuge to shape events far beyond what their official status might suggest. If the softly spoken saga of Hurrem Sultan captivates you, imagine the countless other narratives that remain buried in palace chronicles and foreign dispatches. The whispered refrains of court poets, the fragile parchment of secret letters, and the silent corridors of ruined palaces all conceal revolutions of the heart and mind. Whether through charitable endowments or clandestine counsel, these women seized agency within systems designed to silence them. So, as night deepens and the world grows still, consider the untold chapters waiting to be revealed. Let your curiosity guide you through the labyrinth of history, where every uncovered document and newly translated manuscript promises to illuminate another shadowed chamber of power. For in the end, history's greatest secrets are not the clashing of swords or the roar of cannon, but the quiet determination of those who dared to reshape their world from behind the scenes. Sleep now, and dream of those hidden architects of empire, whose whispers forever changed the course of nations. After Hurrem Sultan's passing in April of 1558, the institutions and influences she had forged did not fade with her final breath, but instead flourished under the reigns of her successors. In the year 1566, her son Shehzad Selim ascended the throne as Selim II, buoyed by the quiet backing of courtiers who remained loyal to his mother's legacy and by the remnants of Hurrem's intelligence network. Though history remembers him by the sobriquet Selim the Drunkard, even his detractors conceded that he could not escape the political gravity emanating from the harem. Behind the scenes, valide sultans, such as Nurbanu, consort to Selim, and later Safiye, consort to Ahmed I, assumed roles of supreme command reminiscent of Hurrem's own shadow rule. The secret corridors Hurrem had carved into Topkapi Palace were strengthened and expanded. By 1568, newly built tunnels linked the outer court to the divan chamber, allowing discreet passage for select pages and eunuchs. Iron-grilled windows overlooking the Grand Council's meetings were retrofitted with wooden shutters that concealed tiny listening holes, transmitting the slightest murmur to waiting ears. In turn, the Imperial Council adapted. Each morning's assembly was followed by the appointment of official recorders whose sole duty was to transcribe every debate and to deliver the transcripts daily to the Valide Sultan's quarters. These ladies' secretaries compiled reports that rivaled the most detailed Grand Vizierial memoranda in their precision. Hurrem's Waqf mechanism also became codified into the framework of imperial charity. During Nurbanu Sultan's tenure as Valide, she formalized the Queen's Waqf by decree on October the 20th, 1570, consolidating revenues from salt taxes levied at a standard rate of 3 aksi per oke of salt and non-agricultural income taxes across Anatolian provinces. With these funds, Nurbanu financed a string of charitable projects. She endowed a small infirmary in Mecca in 1572 that treated 200 pilgrims annually, and in Jerusalem, she built a caravanserai that offered free lodging to impoverished visitors. Safiye Sultan, becoming Valide in 1595, followed suit by founding the Constantinople Medical Institute on May the 3rd of that year, staffed by 15 court physicians and capable of attending to up to 300 patients per month, regardless of faith or station. In matters of diplomacy, Hurrem's legacy of subtle negotiation manifested in a series of strategic marriages and alliances under Selim II. In 1562, 4 years before he formally became Sultan Selim, arranged the nuptials of his half-sister Hurrem Sultan to the Grand Vizier Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, thereby cementing an alliance between the harem's power and the highest offices of state. Through this familial bond, the harem's influence extended into the Council of 40, guiding appointments and decisions. Importantly, this marriage of statecraft maintained equilibrium between the Habsburg monarchy and the Safavid Shah. Letters preserved in the Vatican's secret archives, dated September the 17th, 1567, reference Miramar's intervention to secure the release of Habsburg prisoners, while dispatches from the French ambassador in Paris mention a discreet offer of Ottoman support in return for French naval aid against North African corsairs. Despite persistent opposition from conservative ulama who decried this female rule by proxy as un-Islamic, the tangible successes of the Sultanate of Women silenced many critics. The capture of Cyprus, between 1570 and 1571, under the command of Lala Mustafa Pasha, supported by logistical networks established by Hurrem Sultan, demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated policy. Provincial tax records from Thessaloniki and Rhodes show that revenues increased by nearly 15% in the 2 years following the campaign, evidence that integrated administration and charitable provisioning kept the home front secure. Furthermore, the cultural milieu flourished into a golden age of courtly arts. Palaces along the Bosphorus resonated with new poetic forms, celebrating the Valide sultans. Manuscripts from 1575 onward preserve ghazals that praise the benevolence and wisdom of Valide Nurbanu in elaborate calligraphy. Architecturally, the combination of stone and tile work in public buildings drew inspiration from Hurrem's complexes, featuring Muqana's vaulting and intricate Iznik tile panels. Palace orchestras introduced compositions titled The Valide's Joy, weaving knee flutes and Canaan zithers in evocative melodies that became staples of state banquets. Through these interlocking advancements, intelligence networks, institutionalized charity, dynastic alliances, and cultural patronage, the imperial women who followed Hurrem Sultan sustained her revolutionary spirit. Their stewardship from the late 16th through the early 18th centuries attests to the power of a precedent set by one extraordinary woman, a testament to how strategic vision and compassionate governance can reshape an empire's destiny long after a ruler has passed into history's quiet embrace. In the decade of 1580, the Sultanate of Women reached its zenith, when Safiye Sultan, the last great scion of Hurrem's line, assumed de facto control of the empire's affairs on behalf of her son, Murad III, who had succeeded the throne in 1574. Drawing upon her mother-in-law's legacy, Safiye took her place not merely as a figurehead, but as the architect of policy. In 1581, she established the Valides Council, a select committee of trusted grandees tasked with overseeing every military campaign and civil decree. While the formal divan met in its grand chamber near the palace gate, Safiye's council convened behind velvet curtains in a hidden pavilion, issuing secret orders that shaped troop deployments, land grants, and tax reforms. Western envoys arriving in Constantinople could scarcely believe their eyes. They witnessed palace chamberlains slipping sealed bags of coins beneath the robes of favoured concubines, who then vanished into the twilight corridors, bearing whispered pleas to the Valide Sultan. In a dispatch dated September the 19th, 1583, the Venetian ambassador Alvis Mocenigo lamented that no petition finds its way to Sultan Murad unless first passed through the hands of the Lady Safiye. Diplomats from London, Vienna and Warsaw quickly adopted similar tactics. Letters of introduction would be accompanied by small treasures, embroidered linens, Anatolian carpets, or Persian pearls with explicit instructions that they were intended for the Valide's private collection. Beyond politics, Safiye deepened the philanthropic and cultural footprint pioneered by Hurrem. In early 1582, she commissioned the construction of the Safiye Sultan Islamic Cemetery in Edirne, its marble tombstones inscribed with Quranic verses and biographical epitaphs. Finished on May 3rd, 1582, the cemetery provided dignified burial for pilgrims and soldiers, with room for nearly 2,000 graves arranged in orderly rows. 2 years later, on March 15th, 1584, she founded the Gulhane Women's Academy on the grounds of Topkapi's Northern Garden. This pioneering institution welcomed scholars from Persia and Arabia, in total by 1585, to teach theology, medicine, and astronomy to privileged female students. Such multicultural exchange transformed Istanbul into a vibrant nexus of learning, attracting intellectuals from across the Ottoman domains and beyond. Safiye also undertook the grand redesign of the palace's secret passageways. Ottoman architects recorded in their 1586 construction logs that they expanded the tunnels to span over 900 meters, linking the Valide's private quarters with both the harem and the divan chamber. Narrow bricked corridors were reinforced with vaulted ceilings and concealed guard posts, their complexity described by chief architect Mehmet Ağa as no less formidable than the bastion of Rumeli Hisarı. At the heart of this network lay discreet listening posts, small latticed windows, set just above eye level, through which Safiye's agents could catch every syllable of state deliberations. On the military front, Safiye secured advanced vessels for the Ottoman navy. In 1587, She negotiated clandestine contracts with Genoese shipwrights to deliver 4 galleasses, armed with heavy bronze cannons, while her envoy in Venice acquired 6 additional galleys outfitted with reinforced oaken hulls. These purchases, funded through discreet copper transfers from the Gulhane Academy's endowment, were critical during the war for Tunis in 1589, when the fleet's enhanced firepower helped suppress local corsair strongholds with markedly fewer casualties than in previous campaigns. Yet such breadth of power stoked fierce resistance. As the new century dawned, conservative ulama and disgruntled viziers conspired to curtail the Valide Sultan's authority. In 1601, a faction within the palace sought to strip Safiya of her patronage rights, arguing before Sultan Murad that the balance of power needed restoration. Though Murad dwindled his mother's formal roles, he lacked the will to sever her network or rescind her waqf privileges entirely. When Ahmed I ascended in 1603, he issued an edict limiting the Valide's attendance at council meetings, yet every attempt to fully reassert masculine dominance fell short. Safiya's tunnels remained intact, her charitable foundations continued to prosper, and the title Valide Sultan endured as an indispensable office. Thus, despite early efforts to dismantle the Sultanate of women, the political model Hurrem had inaugurated proved indelible. Under Safiya's stewardship and beyond, Ottoman women of the dynasty maintained their invisible yet undeniable sway over the empire's destiny. In the soft echo of hurried footsteps through secret corridors, in the quiet distribution of alms at dawn, and in the steady hum of diplomatic correspondence, the legacy of a mother's ambition and a daughter-in-law's audacity resonated unbroken and unbowed through the centuries. Following the era of Safiye Sultan, the reigns of Sultan Ahmed I, 1603 to 1617, and his nephew Mustafa I, 1617 to 1618, and again 1622 to 1623, firmly entrenched the Sultanate of women as an immutable pillar of Ottoman governance. Hurrem Sultan, the consort of Ahmed I and mother of Murad IV, assumed the mantle of regent for her underage son in 1603, effectively steering the empire until his majority. She established her own Valides Bureau, a specialized council comprised of carefully chosen grandees who oversaw both military campaigns and civil administration. While the divan officially convened in its majestic hall, Hurrem's Valier, the Valides Bureau, met in parallel, issuing confidential directives that guided the Sultan's ministers and shaped imperial policy. Under her auspices, the charitable waqf system that Hurrem had inaugurated was codified into law. On November the 21st, 1605, Hurrem promulgated a royal decree defining the legal status of waqf endowments. She expanded charitable provisions across the empire, funding madrasas in Bursa and bridge construction over the Tunka River in Edirne. Recognizing the need for qualified administrators, Hurrem pioneered a meritocratic turn in court appointments. In 1607, she opened select positions in the imperial bureaucracy to lesser nobility and even to offspring of palace concubines hitherto excluded from high office. This official examination policy, as recorded in the Topkapı Palace archives, enrolled over 200 candidates in its first cycle, of whom 60 were selected based on demonstrated competence rather than lineage alone. The resulting infusion of talent improved administrative efficiency and diluted the entrenched power of traditional elite families. Within the sequestered confines of the harem, Hurrem acted as a supreme arbiter in internecine disputes. She personally presided over investiture ceremonies, granting titles to hundreds of officials from provincial governors to Sipahi commanders. In 1611, she introduced the Honours Register, a codified roll of merit, based awards for both military valour and civil service. Each entry detailed the recipient's achievements, siege conduct, fiscal acumen, or charitable initiatives, thus fostering healthy competition among the court's hierarchy. By the end of 1616, the Honours Register contained over 300 names, reflecting a transparent system of recognition that eroded favoritism and reinforced loyalty to the Valide Sultan. Diplomatically, Hurrem's subtle hand-shaped momentous outcomes. In 1606, she played a discreet but decisive role in the Treaty of Zitzifotorok, which concluded 15 years of intermittent war with the Habsburg Empire. Her agents liaised with Anatolian governors and Crimean Khanate, envoys to ensure unified Ottoman negotiating positions. Personal correspondence preserved in the Vienna Hofburg archives, dated November the 11th, 1606, credits Kusum's secret deliberations with forestalling internal dissent and securing the treaty's final ratification. Additionally, she mediated clan disputes among Turkish tribes on the empire's European frontier, coordinating with the Anatolian Beylerbey to stabilize volatile borderlands and preempt foreign meddling. Despite resistance from conservative ulama who decried female governance as un-Islamic, the stability and prosperity achieved under Kösem's regency testified to the efficacy of her approach. Provincial records from Thessaloniki and Vidin indicate a decline in peasant revolts by nearly 50% between 1607 and 1616. Meanwhile, fiscal ledgers from the imperial treasury show that state revenues grew by 8% annually during this period, buoyed by improved tax collection and reduced corruption in local administrations. Kösem's distinctive melding of scholarly counsel and charitable patronage solidified her personal authority and cemented the broader phenomenon of the Sultanate of Women. Through codified Wakf endowments, meritocratic appointments, and discreet diplomacy, Valide sultans continued Hurrem's legacy well into the 17th century. Their quiet yet unyielding influence underpinned the Ottoman state during the tumultuous decades following Suleiman the Magnificent's reign, demonstrating that power need not always be wielded by the sword or the pen alone, but also by the measured persistence of maternal stewardship and institutional innovation. At the dawn of the 17th century, the Valide sultan's once unchecked authority began to be more tightly constrained. When Murad IV assumed the throne on August the 17th, 1623, he resolved to curtail the dynasty's maternal influence. Within months, he issued an edict forbidding the construction of any new secret passageways in Topkapi Palace, and decreeing that the Valide Sultan should focus exclusively on charitable and educational endeavors. Military affairs, he declared, were to be conducted without female interference, reinstating a strict separation between the harem and the divan. Yet the model of the Sultanate of Women did not vanish. Rather, it adapted to the new limits. Hurrem Sultan, widow of Ibrahim I and mother of Mehmed IV, exemplified this subtle evolution. Although Murad IV stripped her of formal council privileges in 1623, Turhan quietly maintained the wake of endowment established by Hurrem Sultan. In the winter of 1639, when severe frost decimated Anatolian crops and caused widespread famine, official records cite a 30% drop in provincial grain yields. Turhan mobilized her charitable network. She directed funds from her perpetual trust to distribute grain shipments to over 20,000 destitute families, mitigating the worst of the crisis. Moreover, Turhan inaugurated exclusive diplomatic receptions for royal women. On May the 25th, 1641, she hosted the first ladies' salon in the inner court, inviting consorts of foreign ambassadors and select Ottoman princesses to discuss matters of trade textiles, medicinal remedies, and theological scholarship. Loyal female attendants discreetly conveyed these discussions to the divan's gate, ensuring that Turhan's insights reached the ears of state ministers without overtly contravening Murad's decree. Perhaps Turhan's most tangible assertion of feminine authority was her restoration of the Ahmed I mausoleum, part of the Grand Sultan Ahmed Mosque complex in Eminönü. Between September the 22nd, 1642, and April the 10th, 1645, she oversaw an extensive renovation of Ahmed I's tomb chamber. Ottoman architectural logs preserved in the palace archives record that she personally commissioned masons and artisans from Tbilisi, Baghdad, and Rome to repair marble inlays, recarve ornamental arabesques, and reinforce the dome's drum with silver leaf, a project that cost a total of 12,000 gold ducats. This grand gesture served both as a tribute to her late husband's memory and as a powerful symbol of her continuing influence over the Sacred Heart of the empire. During this period, the locus of female power gradually shifted from direct political intervention to indirect cultural, religious, and charitable influence. The Valide sultans no longer convened in the divan, but they wielded authority through symbolic channels, mosque endowments, poetic patronage, and public festivals. Sermons at the Sultan Ahmed Mosque praised Turhan's benevolence in measured Arabic couplets, while court poets composed qasidas celebrating the silent sovereignty of the Valide. These cultural artifacts circulated among the elite, reinforcing the idea that female leadership, though veiled, remained an integral force in statecraft. Under Turhan's patron Seizhip, the Ottoman-Persian artistic synthesis blossomed into what many now call the golden age of the 17th century. Palace musicians introduced crystalline instrumental suites, collections of 12 compositions titled Echoes of the Harem, that mingled Persian tar and Ottoman knee, a fusion first commissioned by Turan in 1643. Manuscript illuminators, inspired by the silver-leafed dome of Ahmed I's tomb, applied minute gold dust to their folios, producing Quran pages so intricately decorated that they were said to shimmer by candlelight like the stars over Topkapi. Despite these cultural triumphs, conservative ulama continued to denounce the Walids' indirect interventions. Fatwas circulated in Damascus and Cairo in the late 1630s, labeling such symbolic sovereignty a dangerous trend that eroded the Sharia's prescribed roles. Yet the tangible benefits of Turhan's Waqf-funded famine relief, educational salons, and architectural patronage proved undeniable. Provincial tax ledgers from Aleppo indicate that tax revenues rebounded to pre-crisis levels by 1642, while records from Edirne's madrasa note a 25% increase in enrollments following Turhan's scholarship grants. Thus, although Murad IV sought to reassert the Sultan's sole supremacy, the spirit of the Sultanate of Women endured. Through charitable trusts, cultural sponsorship, and the language of religious symbolism, Valide sultans like Turhan maintained a softer yet persistent form of governance. Their influence, woven into the empire's religious, educational, and artistic institutions, demonstrated that political power could be exercised as effectively by subtlety as by decree, a legacy that would echo throughout Ottoman history long after the passage of the last Valide Sultan. By the late 18th century and into the early 19th, the Ottoman realm was beginning to fracture under external pressures and internal reform, yet the embers of Hurrem Sultan's feminine authority still glowed faintly. Although direct political power held by the Valide Sultans was increasingly swept away by modernization efforts, the final Valide Sultans, most notably Hurrem Sultan, who became Valide in 1797, continued to uphold her matrilineal legacy through grand charitable works. In 1802, Mihrisha founded a hospital in Üsküdar that treated over 1,000 patients annually, and in 1805 she financed the construction of a stone bridge over the Sakarya River, improving trade routes between Anatolia and the capital. Through these Waqf of endowments, she preserved the feminine mission of service to the poor, even as the Sublime Porte moved toward constitutional government. The very institutions Hurrem had sparked her perpetual Waqf trusts, the merit-based honours register, and the whispered corridors once linking the harem to the divan receded into history. Yet the essence of feminine power remained etched in Ottoman culture. During the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, from 1876 to 1909, the empire adopted a modernizing constitution and attempted to eradicate courtly patronage systems. Nonetheless, Istanbul's museums continued to display manuscripts, architectural plans, and personal effects of the most powerful Valide sultans, silently reminding visitors of an era when royal women shaped the destiny of 3 continents. When the Ottoman Empire finally dissolved in the aftermath of the Great War, its formal abolition declared on November 1st, 1922, scholars from Turkey, Europe, and the United States undertook a comprehensive re-evaluation of what they came to call the Sultanate of Women. Academic dissertations and monographs published throughout the 1920s and 30s positioned Hurrem Sultan among the most influential figures in Middle Eastern history. International conferences held in Vienna in 1925 and in Istanbul in 1927 debated the notion that women could wield power without holding formal office, laying the groundwork for the modern concept of soft power. In sum, the saga of Hurrem Sultan closes as a remarkable case study, a 15-year-old Ukrainian captive who ignited the first flowering of female agency within an Islamic imperial court. With audacious intellect, artistic grace, and unrelenting ambition, she dismantled 5 foundational conventions, bearing multiple sons, marrying the Sultan, residing within the heart of government, inventing the title of Haseki, and directly influencing statecraft only to reconstruct them as 5 pillars supporting the Ottoman Empire's greatest century of feminine governance. And yet, Hurrem's story is but one among countless untold epics. Across Europe's duchies, Asia's courts, and Africa's kingdoms, silent sovereigns, empresses, princesses, and consorts quietly shaped events that would reverberate across continents. If you are captivated by these hushed revolutions of history, share the name of the next queen or noblewoman whose hidden narrative you wish to unearth. For the archives of the past still guard threads of power, waiting to be woven into the tapestry of our understanding, and in the hush of fading candlelight, their secrets await discovery. And so, as we draw a soft curtain across the grand tapestry of Hurrem Sultan's life, one woven with threads of ambition, compassion, and quiet revolution, let us allow our pace to slow. Imagine the flicker of candlelight dancing along the cool marble walls of Topkapi Palace, the gentle hush of distant waters caressing the shoreline of the Bosphorus, and the faint echo of a knee flute fading into the night air. In these final moments, we release the taut tension of palace intrigue and cradle ourselves in a gentler rhythm. What, then, is the true message nestled within this story of a young Ukrainian slave who rose to reshape an empire? Perhaps it is that power need not be thunderous to be transformative, that a single whisper of wisdom, a carefully placed act of kindness, or the unassuming ripple of charitable hands can outlast armies and edicts. Hurrem Sultan reminds us that leadership can spring from empathy, that the courage to break one's own chains can open the gates for countless others, and that legacy endures not in conquest alone, but in compassion, in lasting institutions of care, and in the soft echo of goodwill carried down through history. So let us breathe in this gentle lesson, that within each of us lies the spark to change the world, not always with fanfare or blade, but often through quiet diligence and heartfelt generosity. As the palace corridors fade into twilight, so too should any lingering cares or restlessness melt away from your mind. Picture them drifting like petals upon a silent sea, carried off by the wash of gentle waves. And now, as the last candle gutter dims and we surrender to the embrace of night, I invite you to rest. Let the weight of history soften into a lullaby of possibility. May your dreams be illuminated by the faint glow of hope and the promise of tomorrow's whispered secrets yet to be uncovered. Sleep well, dear listener, and if you've found comfort or inspiration in this journey, please subscribe to our channel. There, you'll discover more stories that stir the heart and ignite the imagination, each told with care, each whispered with warmth. Until next time, good night and sweet dreams.